Welcome back to the Nosebleeds section. If you can hear me, you are tuned in to episode 5 of From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast. Whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud, I'm Blake O'Rulian alongside my good friend and fellow fight fan, Brick Harris, here to provide a weekly update for all things in the scrap world. Whether it's cage side or from the cheap seats, we got you. Special thanks to Robert Jemias and Don't Be a Richard Music for helping us make this show run. Brick, one word to describe Khabib's performance this past Saturday.
Well, one word that I definitely wouldn't use is lazy. So thank you, Tony Ferguson, for letting me off the hook. In today's show, we will feature, like we just mentioned, Khabib versus Poirier at the ever-exciting UFC 242. In round 2, we will discuss who took the loss from Khabib Nurmagomedov better, Conor McGregor or Dustin Poirier. Good talking point. Then in round 3, we will discuss Paul Felder versus Edson Barbosa and the controversy found therein with the decision. In round 4, we will talk about Diaz and Masvidal thoughts, predictions, things that we think will happen and will possibly go on pre-fight. Then in round 5, we will talk about Justin Gaethje versus Cowboy Cerrone, who will win and who will be next for either of these fighters. Now, instead of taking it back like we've done a few weeks in the past and a few episodes, we are instead going to talk a little bit more about pound-for-pound rankings. Blake?
So I gave my pound-for-pound rankings a few weeks ago. I believe it was episode 2. I have updated them a little bit due to the new, due to what has happened over this past weekend. So at number 15, instead of Jessica Andrade, I have switched that out with Wei Li Zhang with her recent win, her very fast win over Jessica Andrade. Next, I have Israel Adesanya. Number 13, I have a bump down a few spots for Dustin Poirier due to his loss against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Number 12, Daniel Cormier. Number 11, Robert Whittaker. Number 10, Tony Ferguson. Number 9, Colby Covington. Number 8, Stipe Miocic. Number 7, Valentina Shevchenko. Number 6, Kamaru Usman. Number 5, Max Holloway. Number 4, Amanda Nunes. And now we see a drop. Number 3, I have Henry Cejudo. Number 2, I have John Jones. And number 1, after how dominating that performance was, and I will talk more and apologize for my hot takes last week, I have to put it number 1, Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Very interesting, I gotta say. Very, very interesting. The only thing that I have really to say about this pound for pound, I didn't come up with a list because I am, as Tony Ferguson would put it, lazy in comparison to my fellow cohort Blake here. The thing that I do have to say, however, about pound-for-pound rankings, and I feel like it's a big talking point, but the definition of pound-for-pound rankings, at least in my eyes, is a fighter who can win fights and can dominate pound-for-pound, meaning little importance towards the weight class, this fighter is a fighter. Now, it is a toss-up between John Jones and Khabib. I don't think there's anyone necessarily in that tier of conversation quite yet. Here's my take, though. If John Jones were to move up or to move down, if he were to move up and fight and defeat Stipe Miocic or move down and compete for the middleweight belt, he would solidify himself for the next few years, as long as he stays undefeated, as the number 1 pound for pound. Here's why. Khabib Nurmagomedov can go 40-0. Here's what he can't do. He can't move weight classes, rendering himself a little bit less valuable in the conversation of pound for pound. He just wouldn't be able to do it. Guys like Daniel Cormier, Henry Cejudo, Conor McGregor, those guys can do it. But Khabib, he's comfortable where he is. As Tony Ferguson said, he's fighting lazy. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think he's fighting lazy, but I think there's a difference between a pound for pound great who shows he's great, pound for pound, and a guy who slaughters a division and then stays there. Let's think about it. Khabib is possibly the most dominant fighter at lightweight we've ever seen, right? But that's at lightweight. Pound for pound, Khabib's not going anywhere. He's not going to move up because you know he's not going to wrestle with the welterweights. He is in his niche. If there's any fighter in the UFC who has ever found his niche in a division, it is Khabib. And he already has a problem cutting down to 155, so he's not going to drop weight to assert his dominance in other weight classes. So that's my only take on why Khabib, for me, is at least a 2 on the list.
I'll talk about this later, but if Khabib fights GSP, it should be assumed that he would fight at 170 pounds. If and I don't think that he will fight at 170 pounds after that fight. However, I think that if he can assert his dominance over someone like GSP, he does get that respect. However, I would also like to flip the script and say John Jones, who the reason that I put him at 2, and this was strictly just why I put him at number 2 rather than number 1 and had to switch that out. Khabib's dominating performance against Dustin Poirier versus John Jones' last performance against Thiago Santos, where it did come down to a split decision, and Thiago Santos had pretty much everything in his knee destructed after that first round and those early leg kicks from John Jones, and Thiago Santos was still able to find a way to leave with a split decision. However, I do think that it is kind of a toss-up between these two. It is just a matter of what John Jones's performance is like in his next bout, and it really is just a mixture of those two because those two are two of the greatest we've ever seen.
A really good talking point. Honestly, I think this debate will continue to happen over the next few months because, as we're going to be talking about in round 1, and let's dive in, what is next for Khabib?
I think Khabib has the clearest path of any fighter in the UFC. It is very simple. He has 12 fights and 12 wins in the UFC, 28-0 at this point. He's got 2 fights left. Number 1, he has to defeat Tony Ferguson to be named the greatest lightweight of all time, and he will then be projected into one of the top 5 greatest MMA fighters of all time. To absolutely solidify that, it has to be GSP. And that would be the perfect storytale ending to the career of Khabib Nurmagomedov. It would be the perfect way for him to close off his career, to fight his idol, to fight the person that he looks up to so dearly. But first he has to get through the wall and the lightweight king, in my opinion, Tony Ferguson.
I think that's a very good point. I think, as I said just before about pound for pound, it's not impossible for Khabib to move up. I just don't see him being nearly as successful at welterweight as he is at lightweight, just because guys are bigger. Wrestling is so much more important of an aspect in the welterweight division than it is in the lightweight division. So I agree with you there. Tony Ferguson is absolutely next for Khabib. It's the matchup of the year, possibly the matchup of the decade. It's the one that every UFC fan has been waiting to see for years. We have defensive jiu-jitsu and amazing striking versus complete and utter wrestling strength and dominance. I said it last week, and I'll say it again. Khabib is a cheat code. The way cheat codes work is you're able to push simple buttons and do simple tasks in a video game, which would normally appear very pointless and simple, but for some reason, they allow you to do anything you want. That's what Khabib is. Wrestling, using very minute feet and leg jiu-jitsu tactics to bring you to the ground and then ground and pound. It's that simple. Khabib wins fights and he wins belts doing that. So I affirm what I said last week that he is a cheat code. As far as the future of Dustin Poirier, which is interesting and things have happened since Saturday. There was a bit of a call out or a bit of a social media appearance with him and Conor McGregor possibly turning it back. The way that I think about Dustin Poirier at this point in time is he has a bit of a Daniel Cormier-esque decision to make. He could hang up the shoes as a 25-6 fighter, great career, great resume, with not a whole lot to lose, or he could challenge a rematch with Conor, just like DC could challenge a rematch with John Jones, and it might not be to his benefit.
It's tough to see where Dustin is going to go. And the reason I say that is because he has so many miles on him. He's been fighting for so long. He's been in the UFC for so long and been tested so many different ways. I think that the Conor fight does make the most sense for him. Coming back, I think he's improved a lot as a fighter, and a lot of people say that. The other one being Max Holloway. Conor's fought 2 legends, before their prime, and that puts him up on a pedestal, which isn't necessarily there, if you ask me, and if you ask a lot of MMA fans. If Dustin were to fight Conor, I think that would be the clearest and best way for him to simply do that, avenge that loss, and maybe call it a career. Dustin Poirier simply needs to understand that this Khabib loss doesn't define his career whatsoever. Khabib is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Khabib is so special in so many different ways. And as you saw, and as a lot of fans saw, he went to social media following his loss considering possibly alluding to a retirement. And I want to ask you, Brick, what do you think of Dustin Poirier retiring before getting maybe one or two more fights in the octagon?
Like I said, I think it's totally his decision, and it's one of those things where you could see it go either way. I mean, if he takes a fight with Conor McGregor and he wins, that is an amazing time to hang up the shoes, honestly, and he will be paid handsomely for defeating the former lightweight king. However, if he does take a fight with Conor McGregor and he loses to a Conor McGregor who hasn't fought in over a year, that could seriously dampen his outlook on his entire career. I could see Dustin Poirier, and I think it might not be a bad idea to try to avenge maybe another loss, one in possibly Michael Johnson, a fight that's possibly a little easier than Conor McGregor, but is still a boost in his career.
Before we close the round, the only reason that I would not want a Dustin Poirier Michael Johnson fight is where he was at versus who he would fight. If you take a Dustin Poirier who just fought possibly the new pound-for-pound number one fighter in the world and have him fight Michael Johnson, who by no means is any scrub, but I don't think that that's necessarily the fight that Dustin deserves nor the fight that Michael Johnson deserves on both spectrums. Round two, we're going to be talking about who took the Khabib loss better, Conor or Dustin. And this was actually a post that was made by an Instagram meme account called Uncle Dana. They post really, really funny MMA content, so we appreciate the question, and we appreciate being allowed to talk about it. So I pose the question to you, Brick. Who took the Khabib loss better in the last two fights that Khabib has faced, in Khabib's last two opponents, Conor McGregor or Dustin Poirier?
Easy answer. Dustin, right? Easy answer. If we're talking about cultural implications and implications in the division and in these two individuals, it is a blowout. Dustin Poirier took this loss like an absolute champ, although he was sad and it really sucked to lose after that much preparation. I understand, but listen to this. For just a minute, we saw a glimmer of hope of restitution of insanely important matters which were previously torn to shreds. Conor and Khabib's stint of violence, hatred, and disrespect went far beyond martial arts. It was fighting, but it glared the looming disaster that is current world issues like terrorism and intercultural hatred. Khabib and Dustin rekindled bonds, we could say, between the Islamic faith and the Western world. This was done through fighting. It's amazing. There was also charity work done in Abu Dhabi over the weekend. I think that is possibly the best response. If you watch the fight, you saw Khabib and Dustin trade T-shirts. Huge amounts of respect from both guys. I think they took a picture with each other afterwards. Just massive respect. There was a restitution of serious feudal issues between Conor and Khabib. There were a lot of cultural aspects that were wounded from that fight that Dustin very, very gracefully recuperated. So I think as far as everything that happened after the fight, especially because there was a cage jump after the win, but a very different outcome. So I just think everything that happened after the fight, even anything that happened before, was done so much more gracefully, so much more respectfully than that was done by Conor McGregor.
I love the broader spectrum in which you saw that. I looked at it more as who took the loss better as coming out of the fight and then what happened after. When Conor loses so gracefully. When he lost to Floyd Mayweather, he said, he caught me, let me go out, but he caught me. When he lost to Nate Diaz, he hung his head low and said, hey, you know what? He was the better fighter tonight. That's what happened. Same thing with Khabib. Conor doesn't necessarily make the biggest excuses when it comes to losing. He takes it on the chin and he moves on. He says, I'll be better next time. Kind of reminds me a lot of how Ben Askren was when he lost, the most humiliating loss.
Oh, he took it on the chin for sure.
He took it on the chin. Ben Askren and Conor McGregor are two of the best losers, I think, in the UFC. When it's that initial loss, not necessarily the religious hits and all those things that Conor does that are unacceptable by any means. And, martial arts should be about fighting and not about hurting someone's culture, hurting someone's beliefs and things like that. I don't agree with that whatsoever. However, the initial loss, I think Conor McGregor and Ben Askren are two of the best losers. What did Ben Askren say after he lost that fight? Once he finally woke up, he went to Twitter, as he does, typically to talk smack, but this time he went to Twitter and he said, well, that sucked. And I think that that's such a classy way to just kind of make light of it and move on. Conor's very similar in that way where, hey, I lost, I'll come back better.
I agree.
Dustin, on the other hand, comes into the press conference wearing the shirt and the clothes that he thought that he was going to be wearing with that new belt, busted up, battered, and unfortunately, and I'm just answering the question here. He breaks down in that press conference, and it was very sad to see. It reminded me of Daniel Cormier after John Jones and his second loss. It reminded me of Alexander Gustafsson after losing to Anthony Smith earlier this summer and hanging up his gloves and saying the show is over, I'm done. And Dustin considering and almost threatening to retire. I think that mentality ages you as a fighter. And when you're able to take a loss and say, hey, you know what, I really wanted to win this fight, but I lost, and it's time to move on and get better. That's the heart, and that is the mentality of a true champion versus someone who gets a little bit too caught up in a singular moment rather than realizing the macro versus the micro.
As far as morale, I totally agree with you. I may have misunderstood the question. Maybe I didn't.
Maybe I did. We answered the question on two completely different spectrums.
I like it, though. But no, I totally agree with what you said. As far as morale goes, Conor McGregor ended as he came back as the same guy that he was before. Whereas Dustin Poirier, he sounded dark. He sounded somber. He was considering hanging it up, and that's never, a good way to respond to a loss. Now let's jump into round 3. For this particular round, we are going to be talking about the controversial decision of the Paul Felder-Edson Barboza co-main event, which took place this last Saturday night. Blake?
For those of you who follow us on Instagram, we did a live stream of this fight, and we wanted to cover it and do a little play-by-play and give a little bit of insight as to what we were thinking while we were watching the fight live. We ended that live stream early, Brick, because we thought it was without a doubt a Edson Barboza win. Very quickly after we were using your phone, very quickly after they made the announcement from Bruce Buffer that Paul Felder had won the fight, I literally ran to you with your phone, put your thumb on your phone, jumped onto Instagram, and went live again because I could not believe that Paul Felder had won that fight. Let me give you the official scorecards of this fight. 30-27 Barboza. 29-28 Felder. 30-27 Paul Felder. In what world did Paul Felder win all 3 rounds of that fight, Brick?
He did.
So let me explain. The fight totals. Total strikes, 77-75, 43% to 58% for Barboza. Significant strikes, 60-56, 36% of a completion rate for Paul Felder, 53% for Barboza. 1 takedown for Barboza to Paul Felder's 0. There is word now that Edson Barboza's team is going to try to appeal that loss. And I am 100% for it. I don't see in any world where you can statistically defeat a person in every single category and look better in every single category and look at the end of the fight, your face is less beaten than the guy who is going to end up winning this fight and still lose. I have no idea. It was the biggest... It was terrible. It was the biggest atrocity. I don't even know if that's the right word. It was an absolute disgrace that Paul Felder won that fight, given Edson Barboza's sharpness, given Edson Barboza's power, given Edson Barboza's ability to really hold Paul Felder at bay and make him look unorganized, make him look not sharp, make him look like he didn't even belong in that octagon. And for him to win the fight, it just blew me away.
The contrast was staggering. I will give you that. If you watch and go back and look at us talking about the fight live, all 3 of us, me, Robert, and Blake, all concur that Edson Barboza looked sharper. He looked faster. He looked quicker. He just looked better. He did. However, Blake, I'm going to ask you one thing. Do you remember right before the fight ended, the pay-per-view company flew on a graphic, right? A lower third graphic that showed the statistics of the round 3 stats.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I was a little shocked because Paul Felder was, in terms of significant strikes, was ruining Edson Barboza. The stat was unbelievable. It was like a 20-15 strike difference.
Yes.
So that was, to me, a little bit of a hint that this might be closer than we thought. However, I was with you. Right when Edson Barboza got a takedown and with like 10 seconds left in the final round, I was with you. I was with you and Robert both that it's over. I even got up to go to the bathroom. And then when I heard Bruce Buffer say by split decision, I ran back out to hear what was actually going to happen.
It begs the question of what are these officials looking for? It begs the question of who were these officials and what were they really looking for? And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what actually happens with this appeal for Edson Barboza's loss. And I think that pretty much anybody else in the world, anybody else that knows anything about MMA, would clearly understand that Edson Barboza, looking back, probably won that fight.
Here's one of the only other takes that I have about this round. And it's, again, me maybe looking at it at too broad of a spectrum, maybe looking at it with too broad of a view. But in my eyes, this was an incredible, incredible fight, possibly fight of the night. In my opinion, no one got cheated, especially the fans. But yes, it was a tough call. Here's the way I like to see it. It was a little and a lot, or a little and a lot for both of these fighters. Now, let me explain. What I mean is, either way, right, let's say that Edson Barboza wins this fight. Edson Barboza going into this fight had 7 or 8 losses, right? He's not necessarily in title contention again and probably won't be for a little bit. So Edson Barboza wins this fight. It does very little for him. Honestly, he beats Paul Felder for the second time. He looked way sharper. Good for you. It does very little for him. However, a loss for Paul Felder at that in that terms would do a lot. That would hurt him immensely. You saw his emotion after winning. Now I'm going to get to that in a second. Now let's flip it and let's come back to reality. So Paul Felder wins this fight, and it meant a lot, right? It was massive. He was crying in the post-fight. He was crying the second he got his hand raised. He was in his post-fight interview. He was talking about his kids and how hard he worked. He was talking like he had just upset Khabib Nurmagomedov and had won the undisputed lightweight title, but he hadn't. Now, on the other side, for Edson Barboza, again, this shouldn't mean that much. It's another loss for Edson Barboza. He goes from either 7 losses to 8 or from 8 to 9. I don't necessarily have his stats right in front of me. But he's rapidly approaching double-digit losses, which, in my opinion, especially in the lightweight division, that's where you start to slide down the slippery slope of irrelevancy. And
it's not because necessarily the amount of losses, but it's who you're fighting, and it's so difficult to stay at the top. Right? That's the reason why the lightweight division is so hard to be on top of.
One more thing, if Edson Barboza, if this was his first loss in the lightweight division, I'm totally with you. Appeal it, do whatever you got to do because that call was not great. But these two are seasoned fighters, both in a stacked division with so much more happening than their fight. I think because Edson Barboza has as many losses as he has, and he's been knocked out in the past, he's lost recent fights to Justin Gaethje and other rising stars in the division, that I think it does little for him and it does more for Paul Felder to come away with a win.
All right, let's jump into round 4. Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal was announced. What are your thoughts and predictions for that fight, Brick?
All I've got to say is this could very easily be fight of the year. I think we have one hype video that the UFC and ESPN has put out, but already I get goosebumps and I think about how insane this fight's going to be, whether it goes to the decision or there's a knockout, because I really don't know if there's going to be a submission. I would be surprised to see either of these two guys tap. But as far as the BMF belt, and we're going to call it the BMF belt because we can't say...
We have to call it the BMF belt.
We have to. We can't say what it is, but use your imagination if you have to. Go back and look at what Nate Diaz said. But the BMF belt, Madison Square Garden in November, it's going to be incredible. And the reason why it makes so much sense that this is the BMF belt, it's perfect. Let's compare, okay? George Masvidal, 34-13 record. He's 34 years old, and he's still a dog. He has incredible wins. He has double-digit losses. right? I watched I watched an interview with him and I think it was Ariel Helwani, I'm not exactly sure, but he talked about how he was offered a fight with Kamaru Usman for the title, and he said, I don't really know, I'd rather fight Nate Diaz. It's going to be violent, it's going to be intense, and he said word for word, these types of fights speak to my soul. Usman will get it, but first I want to throw down. Those couple of sentences make him one of the BMF contenders already, okay? Now, Nate Diaz, 21-11, 34 years old, and still a dog. He has insanely hard-fought and impressive wins, right? Against Conor McGregor, recently against Anthony Pettis. He also has double-digit losses, and he is still a gangster. I think that's what makes this one of the most impressive and fun fights. Not to mention, the fact that it's for a quote-unquote belt is hilarious, because I also looked up, neither of these guys have ever held a belt. No. Neither of them, ever, for a day. So the fact that this is going to be called a championship fight, I love. It's going to be the main card, it's going to be so much fun, and it's to see who the baddest MF on the planet is.
There's a couple reasons why this is such a special card. Number one being, for the first time in, I believe, 3 years, a UFC numbered event, so a 240-something or a 220, whatever. For the first time since, I believe, Conor Nate, it is the main event, and the main event, the 5-round fight, will be a non-title fight, which is a huge deal for the UFC. I think what also makes this so exciting is the story. This is... and why this tugs at the heartstrings of so many true MMA fans. This is bad guy versus bad guy. This is East Coast versus West Coast. This is California, Stockton versus the sandy beaches of Miami, Florida. This is going to be so much fun. Two veterans, two guys that just like to get in there and fight. Now, I do think that Nate Diaz has the chance to tap out Jorge Masvidal, because Nate Diaz's jiu-jitsu is another level. And we saw his wrestling, we saw his jiu-jitsu against Anthony Pettis, and it was next level. If Nate Diaz comes into this fight and fights the way that he fought Anthony Pettis, Jorge Masvidal might have a long night. However, I don't really want to think about the X's and O's of this fight. I just want to talk about how incredible this thing is. However, I must say, if I do have to give a prediction, I give it to Nate Diaz because of how good he looked. And if he does get this win over Jorge Masvidal, let's not forget what you just said. He had a fight with Kamaru Usman almost set up, because Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman haven't been able to figure out their differences just yet. If Nate Diaz beats Jorge Masvidal, he is in title contention to hold the legitimate 170-pound belt, which you and I and all of our fans know is one of the toughest belts to hold in one of the toughest weight classes in the world.
Absolutely. And I said it just a few minutes ago, I don't think Khabib Nurmagomedov, as hard it is for him to make weight at 155, I don't think he necessarily would hold a belt at 170. That might be crazy for me to say, and people might give me a ton of backlash, but that's how good the welterweight division is.
That's how many good wrestlers there are. Let's just name off the top. So if we're considering Nate Diaz's wrestling in his last fight versus, and as along with his jiu-jitsu, so his grappling background, you've got Nate Diaz, you've got Colby Covington, you've got Kamaru Usman, you've got Ben Askren. Those are just four of the best wrestlers in the entire world. Who else do you have?
Not to mention Tyron Woodley.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Tyron Woodley as well. Great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, collegiate wrestler. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Tyron Woodley versus Khabib Nurmagomedov would be crazy, because one of the most marking fights that I can remember for Tyron Woodley's career was his title defense against Damian Maia. Damian Maia, who is known as one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters and wrestlers in the game today. I don't think, if I remember correctly, the stats were he had zero successful takedowns. Damian Maia did. Tyron Woodley defended every single takedown of this takedown artist. Now, if Khabib wanted to move up and solidify himself as the pound-for-pound number one, it would have to be against either GSP or one of these welterweight greats, and I don't think that Khabib would do it. I know we're backtracking a little bit, but that's just how fun and exciting the welterweight division is right now.
Tyron Woodley's takedown defense is legit. Damian Maia versus Tyron Woodley, July 29, 2017. Damian Maia, 21 attempted takedowns, 0 completes.
See what I'm saying? You got two foreigners, one in Brazil, one in Russia, who both are dominant wrestlers. Damian Maia has been in the game for like 20-something years, and he has been a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu king. But guess who he couldn't take down one time out of 21 attempts? And Tyron Woodley, if he needs to, he'll wrestle Khabib, but Khabib I don't think is strong enough to do what Damian Maia couldn't do, and that's take down Tyron Woodley or any of these welterweight contenders.
It's going to be fun. UFC 244, November. We will be live for that for sure. Absolutely. Let's jump into round 5. Justin Gaethje versus Cowboy Cerrone this weekend, a lightweight bout. Who do you think wins, and who do you think will be next for these fighters, Brick?
Well, it's interesting because we have an old king and a rising star, right? Donald Cerrone should and will be considered one of the greatest lightweights of all time. An insane amount of wins. He's got a very impressive track record with fights that he's won and fighters that he's faced. However, Justin Gaethje he only has 2 losses in his entire career. And I had a WSOF beanie that I was going to bring in here and put on and go full Lee Corso, but I forgot it. But if I had to make a pick, I would go with Justin Gaethje. I think Justin Gaethje, he's coming off 2 incredible knockout wins, one against James Vick and then earlier this year against Edson Barbosa. He has lost to Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez. That is it. Other than that, he was a dominant force in the WSOF, which later turned into PFL. Absolutely incredible striker, great wrestler. I give advantage Gaethje in this one.
I'm just going to break down why I think the way that I do in terms of who's going to win this fight, and it strictly comes down to age, and it comes down to mileage this year. This is going to be Cowboy's 4th fight. Not to mention, he is coming off of a nasty loss to Tony Ferguson. He was busted up pretty bad. And I think that Cowboy Cerrone at some point is going to have to slow down, but that's never been his style, and that never will be his style. With that being said, I think I agree with you. Gaethje is probably going to get this win. And I don't think that it's going to be a very long fight. I think Gaethje's going to catch Cowboy early, and it's going to be very quick it's going to be a very quick night for Cowboy Cerrone. With that being said, I think that this makes Conor Gaethje more possible, but I don't see Conor stooping down that low despite all of the things that were said this past weekend, and I'm going to talk about that later. So if Cowboy is to lose this fight, I think he gets another fight early next year versus someone like a Paul Felder. And for Justin Gaethje, he has to sit around and wait and see what happens with the higher tiers in the lightweight division, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later.
See, but I disagree a little bit. I think Justin Gaethje, with a win over Donald Cerrone, no matter how old he is, no matter how many miles he has on him, Donald Cerrone, if you beat Donald Cerrone, you're
legit.
Yeah, you are a legit lightweight. And Justin Gaethje's career building up to this one fight has been very up, not a whole lot of down. And the fact that he's only got he has less losses than Conor McGregor. He has less losses than a lot of guys in lightweight title contention. However, his experience in the UFC is limited. I think if Justin Gaethje beats Donald Cerrone, beats Cowboy, especially with a knockout, which I think is the way he's going to do it, Justin Gaethje has unbelievable power. For a lightweight, his striking ability and his power and accuracy mixed with a combination of years and years of great wrestling is amazing. So I think this fight it's just going to be crazy. It's going to be a crazy fight. There's a lot happening in the lightweight division, but honestly, I think Justin Gaethje with a win this weekend solidifies himself as at least one of the top 3 guys to go up against Khabib in the next 6 months. Now, I don't think Gaethje Khabib is going to happen because Khabib calls the shots now. He can do whatever he wants in the division. But I think after Khabib vacates, I think Justin Gaethje will hold a UFC lightweight title at some point in the next year or so.
We saw Justin Gaethje's fight against Edson Barbosa and that early round 1 knockout that was absolutely ruthless. And we see, like you said, the striking accuracy, his ability to knock his opponents down. I think that it's going to be over quick. All right, we are hitting the end of our show. We have finished our 5 rounds. Brick, I appreciate the conversations and the discussions we have had. We are going to jump into our final thoughts of the week. Brick, I want to give the time over to you to start us out.
On November 12th, 1993, Royce Gracie, draped in his traditional white Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gi and black belt, won the first ever UFC promotion. The years prior to its inaugural event, weight classes would be implemented, the tournament format would be done away with in the UFC. Dana White and the Fertitta brothers step into frame January 2001, buying the UFC for $2 million. The company would then grow and absorb other fighting promotions, displaying its dominance all throughout the globe. In 2012, Ronda Rousey was signed as the first ever female UFC fighter. On July 10th, 2016, the UFC was sold for $4 billion. With dozens of variables in a monopoly company in the world's most competitive sport, it's hard to find a single constant, right? Unless we're talking about the game within the game. In ancient Rome, the victor of a battle in the Colosseum in front of royalty, paying customers, the masses, would be crowned with the reward of continuing to live. That was his reward. He got to, stay alive. In modern-day gladiatordom, the winner of a fight receives a similar award. The post-fight interview featuring a UFC champion or otherwise winner is nearly as anticipated as the fight itself, breathing a new breath of life into the fighter's career, giving him the filibuster spotlight that every impulsive, exuberant fighter longs for. Breaking noses, rendering grown men unconscious, and vicious combat is only one side of this game. From Chael Sonnen belligerently responding to questions with nothing but fighters' names and then an insult, such as Vanderlei Silva or Anderson Silva, to Colby Covington's controversial word choice and cultural disrespect, the call-out game is a big one. In the past few months, we have been rocked by some of the most groundbreaking call-outs in UFC history. John Jones calls out former heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar. Dustin Poirier calls out Khabib in a dramatic fashion for a unification of the 155 title belt. Nate Diaz calls out George Gamebred Masvidal, sparking one of the most exciting welterweight bouts of all time, the BMF title. Last but not least, Henry Cejudo calling out Valentina Shevchenko and or anything that breathes. In some cases, they shouldn't be called call-outs, more so cringe-outs. Thanks to guys like Tony Ferguson, Brock Lesnar, Henry Cejudo, Gregor Gillespie more recently, and other cringe artists, that pseudonym might actually become a reality. We are living in an era where call-outs and trash talk gathers more attention and hype than any genre of knockout possible. And you know what? I'm here for it, FTN is here for it, and I'm pretty sure everyone else is here for it.
My final thought this week goes out to the ballsiest man in the sport. The guy who stuck it to the man this weekend. The guy who said, "You're a tool. You have lost everything already. You are a ish human, father, and husband. F you." My final thought goes out to none other than Justin Gaethje, the middle child of the lightweight division. You know, the kid who gets left at the park on accident. The kid who has siblings to his left and to his right and always seems to be left behind. The kid who deserves more attention but does not get it simply because they don't have a clear role in the family. The oldest has all the responsibility, the youngest gets babied, This is not a call-out. This is not a bash nor a praising session. This is a reality check. As long as you have the most dominant fighter in the world, as long as you have the most popular fighter of all time, as long as you have the most consistent and most deserving fighter in the world, you are going to be forgotten. It does not matter what you say or what you tweet. It does not matter what you do this Saturday against a big name like Cowboy Cerrone. The attention will be on the other three. The three who have a role in this division. The tragedy of Justin Gaethje's dominance is it will not be remembered the way that it should. 20-2, 17 knockouts, wins over guys like Edson Barboza, James Vick, and Michael Johnson. A guy who has only gone to the decision twice in his 22-fight career and won both. Title contention in money fights will not be talked about, no matter what he does on Saturday. Meanwhile, his brothers, Khabib, Conor, and Tony, will get all the talk as to who gets to fight for the title. Until Khabib is gone, or Tony is champ, or Conor makes a comeback, there are too many developing stories at the top of the division. I hope that can change. I hope he gets the credibility that he deserves. Until that happens, Justin will be at the park left behind. Not because of any wrongdoing, but because he does not have the solidified role necessary to keep up with his siblings. Middle child syndrome is sad. It is real, and Justin Gaethje is living in it because he is in a family of stars and legends.
What a fun week, a fight week before and after this beautiful From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast show. This weekend we have Justin Gaethje versus Donald Cerrone. We have Diaz Masvidal coming up. During the show, we talked a lot about Khabib and Dustin Poirier. We also talked a little bit about Conor McGregor. So thank you again for listening, and tune in next week as we have a lot more to talk about. We want to just give a shout out to the Verdict MMA Instagram page. They are an analytical page that breaks down fights, breaks down stats. We use their content a lot. They're really great. We encourage you to follow them. Also, A Story About a Fight is a Instagram page, and they are working on a short film about a fighter. It is a production made by fight fans for fight fans. You can donate and track their progress on Indiegogo. Search A Story About a Fight. Sneak peek trailer is out now, and I gotta say, they are their trailer's pretty legit. It is voiced by none other than the Bruce Buffer. So go give them a look, go give them a follow, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate all the love and support. We would like to thank Robert Jemias for helping us out. We would also like to thank Don't Be a Richard. And with that being said, send us off.